the Phelan-McDermid podcast, sharing research, progress, and hope. Over the past year, the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome podcast has featured 6 of our grant awardee recipients. In addition to highlighting the new exciting research that is happening in the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome field, these podcasts have really given us a chance to highlight the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation's commitment to funding research. The foundation has a really strong history of funding research, and we're not stopping anytime soon. Today, I'm lucky to have Megan O'Boyle, a previous full-time PMSF volunteer, who has helped ensure that the foundation has been invested in research since the very beginning, and who has a deep personal connection to the importance of research funding. Welcome, Megan, and thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be here. And hello to my PMS family that I began meeting when Shannon was diagnosed in 2001 at the age of 8 months. I never thought I'd say this, but both research and fundraising are very near and dear to me. But this hasn't always been the case. Our first family conference in North Carolina was 2006. And at the end, the founder, Sue Lemus, said, "We could really use you as a volunteer." And I said, "Oh, my plate is full with Shannon." I thought later about it, and Sue had a child with PMS, and so did all the other volunteers that ran this conference. So in 2010, a parent approached me and said, "We really need somebody to help start a registry." And I was like, "Oh, I don't like research, and it's not going to happen in my daughter's lifetime. Let me help you with a newsletter or something." They were persistent, and I agreed to go to a meeting. And a year later, we had the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Research Committee, and I was in charge of launching a registry. If I had known any idea what I was about to do, I would have run. But I didn't, and I very naively thought I was just going to follow all the other rare diseases that were starting registries. As it turns out, we were on the forefront. Other diseases weren't collecting data. So I will get into that a little bit more. So in 2010, I was going to meetings and I was asking all the other rare disease groups, "So how did you start your registry?" And their answer was, "We don't know how, we can't afford to, or that's something the researchers do." I learned, though, that when researchers send questionnaires and collect data on families like ours, they keep it. They don't share it with other researchers. They don't share it with drug companies. So then families, when the next researcher wants data, they got to answer all the same questions over again. And this is one of the reasons that we kept on our task of wanting to have our own registry where we could collect data as often as we could from all the new families and make that de-identified data available to researchers, drug companies, and back to our families who could make it available to their doctors. So we finally figured it out. And in 2011, when we launched it, I really seriously felt like I'd given birth to my 4th child.
Well, I mean, thank you for starting off with sort of our history lesson here because, 15 years later, we are still using the PMSIR data. It is now transformed into the Data Hub, which is also available for families and industry and researchers to use. But what I think you point towards right there is that as a foundation, we've been so invested in research, yet we totally undersell ourselves in terms of what we've been a part of and what we've been funding in terms of research over the years. Just like you said, we were sort of the foundation was on the forefront at the beginning of building our own registry, and we've had a registry continuously since then that has been, really important to us and has led to some really important, impactful findings and clinical consensus guidelines, and hopefully some, additional information and insight to these families. So thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for birthing this child and sort of seeing it to fruition, because again, as coming from the academic side, research and specific projects definitely feel like a child and there is so much labor and pain that is involved, but then you have this thing afterwards that so many people and across sort of the spectrum in our community can use. So it's pretty amazing what you've done.
Thank you. And I think that as a foundation, we have never been good at stopping and celebrating our accomplishments. It was like, oh, we did it, and went on to the next project. And I see the foundation doing that now. I mean, the foundation has grown. It's not 100% volunteer. There are staff, but the amount of families that they're supporting in the places around the world and the amount of family support and research that's going on, I think everybody's making it look so easy that the families in the background don't really know what's going on in the background. And there's a lot. There's a lot of effort going on by the staff. There's a lot of effort going on by researchers that our families never meet or will never know.
Right.
They know some of their names, but not all of them. In 2013, we had an opportunity to go after a grant. Again, I was like, no, we can't do this. And again, nobody listened to me. And lo and behold, we were awarded this grant. And I mean, hundreds of rare diseases went after this. And only about 12 groups were awarded this grant for 3 or 4 years. So we partnered with Harvard Department of Informatics, and we collected and added a lot more really valuable data to the registry, which later became the Data Hub. For starters, we collected from 100 families all of their medical records, paper medical records back in the day, everybody. And then our team at Harvard had to scan them and then clean them and then turn them into searchable data. So we're getting into machine learning and AI and all that right now. And meanwhile, we were also had genetic counselors that were taking the genetic reports that come from different labs all over the world in different languages. And in order for researchers to be able to make sense of them, all the genetic reports had to go into a system in a systematic way. So that grant allowed us to do that, which was huge. Because you think about it, if a researcher is looking at somebody's symptoms over time and they don't know what the genetic difference is, it's only half a picture.
Right.
And this was the first time we really had an opportunity to say, if somebody has a misspelling here versus a mutation there versus a deletion over here, this is what their future may look like. And as the families know, every child is different, every course is different. But that was a really big time for us.
Yeah. Well, and the grant was funded through PCORI, which is an outstanding non-federal grant distribution institution, and it continues to be really important in this field. And so hopefully in the future we can continue to get some more PCORI funding. But like you said, it sort of, again, helped sort of launch that second phase of data collection. And now we have, we are funding ourselves the Data Hub right now through the generous donations that you all listeners and families, friends are providing. And at this point, we have over 1,000 patients in our Data Hub, and that's in addition to the patients that were in our PMSIR. And so, we're getting general health information from them, including countless symptoms, their medications, and then, as you mentioned, we're still collecting those genetic reports, and we have consultants who are genetic counselors who are curating them. And so we're, continuing to collect all this data, and it's going to be available for researchers, families, industry to really help sort of move things forward along. And so, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, just in terms of, the foundation's commitment to research, kind of along these lines, is that we're in the middle cycle, or kind of the middle of 2 cycles of the natural history study, which is funded by the NIH.
I call time out, Lauren.
Yeah.
I didn't really explain how much I am not a science and research person. And many Phelan-McDermid syndrome families have become like researchers themselves. I am not one of them. So when I talk to researchers and industry and people at NIH, we have something called Megan speak. So to me, a natural history study sounds like something that I would see at the Smithsonian Museum in DC. So if you could explain in Megan speak what a natural history study is and why it is imperative for a disease to get treatment.
Yes. Absolutely. So, a natural history study, kind of like it sounds, really is looking at something specific over time. And so in this case, our natural history study is looking at Phelan-McDermid syndrome over time. And it's not looking at it necessarily providing or comparing treatments. It's really just looking at what are the symptoms of this? What are the behaviors that are associated with Phelan-McDermid syndrome? And this is tends to follow the same individuals for a number of years. And so we've now had two cycles of the natural history study that's really helping us answer what does sleep, behavior, other medical conditions, and language look at different stages of development and how they change over time. And because of this, the natural history studies are so critical for both researchers, clinicians, and drug companies to figure out sort of what we need interventions for, what we need pharmacological treatments for, and when potentially to intervene. The grant itself is also sometimes called the DSC, which can be really confusing for families. This is because the actual grant from NIH, if you ever look it up on NIH website, is called the Developmental Synaptopathies Consortium, which is a mouthful in of itself. And Phelan-McDermid syndrome is one of three different disorders that's kind of part of that consortium. And so collectively, it seems like the Phelan-McDermid community is like, we're just going to call it the natural history study because it's a little bit easier to say, easier to pronounce, but understandably, it's a little confusing to families. And so even though this has been NIH funded for two cycles, so that's two 5-year periods, there are extra expenses that come up with this. First of all, there's only a handful of natural history study sites, and they're not necessarily conveniently located for families. And so families need to travel. Travel costs money. And so the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation has committed to funding up to $50,000 annually to help families travel to these sites. And so that's one sort of way to help increase access and reduce sort of barriers to attending these natural history studies appointments, which occur sometimes more than once a year, definitely annually. And then the second thing I should mention is that right now we are in this sort of intern period between the second round being funded and completed, and now we're waiting to hear about the third round. And so in this interim period, PMSF is also providing funds so that we can continue collecting that follow-up data for people who have already been in the study, which again is going to be really important so we can follow these individuals over time and map out how their symptoms, medical conditions, medications change over time.
It's just a huge thing to have a natural history study. Since I got thrown into this area of research, mostly because I live in the DC area and I live near NIH and FDA and all sorts of places. I've had to learn, and I've sat into a lot of meetings, and I've learned what natural history studies and registries and those things are and what they mean. And lots of new rare diseases are coming along because of sequencing. And they're going straight for, we want gene therapy and we want a cure and we're going to start a tech company and what do we need to do? And the very first thing that mentors will say is you have to have a natural history study and you have to have a registry.
Yep.
So the fact that Phelan-McDermid syndrome was able to think this through and start this so long ago with very little funding other than donations is just a sign of how forward thinking we were, all the while still supporting families. And I will say we were fortunate to be in the natural history study because it's 20 minutes away from our house. And so we went, every couple times a year. And because my daughter was probably one of the older people, Shannon would be 25 this August, they were seeing things in Shannon that they weren't seeing in the publications because she was older than the children that had been studied in the past. And she was one of the first to start to show symptoms that we now know were symptoms of catatonia. But in 2014 and 2015, nobody in the world were using those words. And so seeing people of different ages over time gives a really good picture of how a disease can move forward. It was also a resource for us because they would do assessments and testing, and in some instances say, you know what, you should really go back to your pediatrician and ask them for a, feeding study.
Hmm.
You really should go to the PT and see about getting stockings for the lymphedema. So they weren't just taking in data and
Right.
taking up our time, they were supporting us. And ultimately, from the natural history study and eventually the registry, what will come are publications.
Yep.
And I don't read those publications, but pediatricians and psychiatrists and emergency room doctors and researchers and drug companies read them.
Yep.
And by having more data than most of the diseases like us, because we got this sooner, we look sexier. If you're a researcher and you only have X to spend, and if you work with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, they've already collected the data and the natural history.
Yep.
You can move on to the next stage. Or you have another disease that looks similar, but you're going to have to spend your research dollars collecting data and starting a natural history study.
Right.
You know, we've made it easy for them.
I love what you've pointed out there because I think, first of all, the natural history studies, sure, it's sexy for researchers and industry, but it also has been the most informative for our clinical consensus guidelines that have come out, which are often either in publications that, yeah, pediatricians and other physicians and providers can read, but then we summarize them as a foundation to help you guys also, families for your loved ones, understand what sort of next steps, what do you need to talk to your doctor about, of I'm noticing this is common in Phelan-McDermid syndrome, we need to do something about it. And so, the natural history study also provides or sort of leads to a lot of those clinical recommendations and understanding of what is this going to look like. And again, not in partially because of the natural history study, what we've learned from the PMSIR so far is, like you said, for Shannon, this idea or this symptom around neuropsychiatric illness. And now we have a physician consult group that meets twice a month on neuropsychiatric illness cases around the world. And again, I think a lot of this would have not, these clinical supports that, we offer and support at the foundation would not be possible without starting in that research that we invested in.
And I can tell you firsthand, when unfortunately after a fall, Shannon was in 5 hospitals over 6 months back to back. And because of various situations, she was catatonic most of the time. And because of the work, the previous few years, the neuropsych committee at the foundation, none of whom get paid, by the way,
Yeah.
these researchers donate their time to put their heads together and figure out what's going on. I was able to say to the doctors at all these places, here's the 1 or 2 publications that have come out. And I will tell you, a doctor is more likely to believe a publication than the
Mhm.
mother who is standing in front of him, who has raised that child for 23 years. It's
Yeah,
just a fact of life.
unfortunately.
So, as boring as publications may seem to people like me, they are critical to getting the information out to the people that we need to have it.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it is sort of that other piece of the puzzle of I will, never not admit that a parent is always going to be way more of an expert on their child and their child's condition than I will ever be, since I don't have that lived experience. Unfortunately, there's just sort of the trend in the field that they're gonna believe a paper than a parent. And so, papers also help give you the sources and the you need to help advocate for your kid. And so, that is, I think, also a large role that hopefully we can continue play as the foundation of sort of leveraging the research that we support into clinical care and ultimately enhancing quality of life and health. So, maybe a weird segue, but I think one of the other things that I do want to bring up here is that, even beyond the registry that we have, our support for the natural history study, is that the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation formally established its own grant award program in 2023. Because even though these are really important studies, there's so much to research still and understand and investigate in Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And so this was a way to provide additional funds to important research that's out there.
Yeah, and I have to say that over the years, I've seen other organizations, usually newer ones, where they'll have a big fundraiser or they'll have wealthy families and
Mhm.
they have their favorite researcher and they stroke them a check and that researcher goes out and does something.
Yep.
A grants program doesn't care who is who and what your relationship is. It is a very competitive platform where you as a foundation put out an ask with rules and a
Yep.
deadline, and researchers hear about it and they fill out the application and they try and convince you that their idea is more important than the other 30 people that are going to apply for that pot of money. And then you and your advisors go through all those applications and decide where that money goes. And the reason that's important is when I talk to my family and friends that donate to the foundation, I can say very confidently, this money is very well spent and very carefully thought through. We're not just handing things over to, the researchers that we've been working with. And
Right.
that's another sign of a very mature disease foundation.
Right. And I really want to emphasize that, we're providing the structure for that program and for those asks. And of course, we're, reading and evaluating and ultimately deciding, which researcher is getting which money. But it depends a lot on some volunteers, our scientific volunteers. Every application first goes through a scientific review process where three different researchers are reading, scoring the application, and then from there we send them to our family reviewers. So each family reviewer is also reviewing 2 to 3 applications so that we're also, we want to make sure that it's good science, asking good research questions, and is feasible to do. But we also want to make sure it's important to families because you could have a genius scientific idea, but if it is light years away from getting into the clinic, providing meaningful data that has a logical step into the clinic, it might just not be something that, as a foundation, we want to fund at this point. And so, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we did a podcast episode for each of the grant awardees over the past couple months. But I do want to highlight sort of the breadth and depth of what we are funding. So we've funded both sort of basic science, which is really the study of how things work. What does the SHANK3 gene do? How do the brain cells in an individual with Phelan-McDermid syndrome differ from someone who doesn't or has a mouse model of SHANK3 differ from one that is wild type or has a normal, quote unquote, normal SHANK3 gene. We also fund translational science, which is really about bridging that gap between those basic science questions to before we get to the clinic. So these typically will involve maybe some rodent models or some patient-derived iPSC cells. So lab-grown cells from individual derived from patients with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And what I want to point out here is that Dr. Bridget Moffitt had an innovation award in 2023 to identify some candidate drugs through patient-derived iPSC cells. And Dr. Joao Pesa got a translational award focused on identifying sort of the additional roles of SHANK3 in early development. So looking at different ways SHANK3 might interact with different genes or cells that have not looked at before. And not stopping there, we've obviously invested a lot of some of our research dollars also into clinical studies. So these are the studies that are being done in humans, asking questions to parents, doing direct testing of individuals with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And so we have this past year funded Dr. Julia Dahlman's study to really better understand gut motility issues that underlie GI problems. There is a new portion of that study that's about to get announced for recruitment. And then Dr. Milena Anselm is also looking at a connection between the potential immune mechanisms and neuropsychiatric illness. So these are just getting, some of these are getting started and are different points along the way. And all of our podcasts really have kind of helped set up what is going on. And then finally, I know I've talking a lot and I want to get back to some of the things Megan's talking about. But again, we've been able to fund so much great work that another really important area of interest for us that we've founded is funding research studies that are thinking about outcome measures. And so these are the measures that either parents fill out or again are direct testing of individuals that track symptoms. And we know as a disorder that a lot of the measures that look at behavior or cognition have been made for typically developing population. We know that individuals with Phelan-McDermid syndrome are developmentally delayed, and so they're, not able to necessarily complete a lot of these measures, or parents are constantly responding no to things in adaptive skills or their communication. And so we funded a couple different projects to really enhance these outcome measures so that not only can we understand the disorder and can maybe even be incorporated into the natural history study, but they can also be used as potential endpoints or measures within a clinical trial to see if a certain intervention is impacting a specific area of functioning. So we funded Dr. Christy Johnson's work, who is developing a communication measure that's kind of based in the home and looking at everything from verbal communication to non-verbal communication. We have funded Dr. Pilar Trellis and Tess Levy to really refine this measure around neuropsychiatric illness. And then finally, as I mentioned before, Dr. Julia Dahlman has this GI study, and she's worked on a app based measure to really help families track GI symptoms on a day-to-day basis. So we funded a lot of different kinds of work that tackle different important areas of functioning and needs within the community.
And Lauren, I think what's really important there is that they are needs of the community.
Yep.
And if you listen to news or the radio, it's like, and there's a study out that says that people that drink 17 sodas a day, tend to walk slower. And you're like, who wants this study?
Yeah.
And researchers historically will often go after grants that they know that they can get and get a publication out of, which helps their career.
Yep.
But not necessarily something that any patient cares about
Mm-hmm.
or is going to improve their life. And that has always been something that the foundation has been very specific about. We are going to fund what will help our families now and in the future. Yep. And when I said in 2010, nothing's going to happen in our lifetime, 8 years later, my daughter was in the AMO clinical trial at Mount Sinai. I was so wrong. There are things happening now that are helping our families now and will help them very soon. And I think that is important, especially when you're thinking about, fundraising. And it's important when you're participating in research that you're not just doing this for the next generation, which is great, but you're doing this for your child and the others. And as a parent, I can tell you, there are more days that we have where we feel helpless and hopeless that we can't help our children who may not be able to communicate or may not be able to walk. And I've always felt like I was doing something for Shannon when she was participating in research or I was answering surveys. Because my answers to those surveys become data and data becomes that paper. So even though they may not believe me when I tell them in person, they will believe the data that comes from my service. So I really want to emphasize that this isn't research for the sake of doing research. This is research to help our children's GI issues and communication issues and things that affect everyone's quality of life.
Absolutely. And to that point, I want to remind the listeners that the families are the ones that chose our three original topics for the grants. So we had the innovation grant, the translational grant, and the neuropsychiatric illness grant. And now that we're 3 years in, we are at a point where we want to re-ask the question of what is most important to our families. The research that has come out in those 3 years, the changes that have maybe happened in their kids' lives might alter where we want to put that funding. And again, we want to put the funding towards something that are going to help patients and families now, especially because those grants that we provide are 100% from the donations that our families and their families' friends are raising. So it's your research dollars that are directly going into and paying for the research that is happening. So of course we would want to make sure that the people who are raising the funds have a say in where that money is going and the topics that we fund. So this is also a time where I want to give you, Megan, a huge shout out because you have just been committed in so many different ways and forms since you joined the community in 2010. So can you tell us a little bit more about your history and involvement with PMSF and then eventually how it led to you doing some specific fundraisers too?
Sure. And don't give me too much credit because once again, I was a naysayer. And in 2006, I sat through a family conference session, and it was about how important fundraising was. Remember, in those years, everybody on the board of directors, everybody that was running the foundation were volunteer parents. They had children that they were taking care of and IEPs that they were writing, and they were raising the money. And I, of course, was like, well, I can't ask my friends and family. That would be awkward. And so I didn't, but I could have. Then fast forward to 2010, and I am thrown into this, we got to do a registry. Well, guess what? It ain't free. It was going to be at least $10,000 a year, and that was just for basic. And that wasn't to pay any of us. That was for the infrastructure of the data collection.
Yep.
So I went from, I don't think I can do this, it's a little awkward, to we have to do this and we have to do it well. And some very clever family had come up with this, ask 22 of your friends to raise $22 each in 22 days. And I was like, you know what? If you give someone a real number like that, it helps them make a decision.
Yep.
If someone says, please donate, my daughter's running in a marathon, I'm like, well, $20 seem cheap. I don't really know, this kid is 50 too much. But when you give them 22, it kind of narrows it down. And if they want to give more, super.
Right.
So we chose Shannon's birth date, which was August 17th. And every year since 2012, we have sent out a letter with pictures of Shannon and an update of what she's doing in school or what she's doing with horseback riding, and an update of what the foundation has done in the past year. So the first year we sent everything out by snail mail, and we had some very generous checks. This is a long time ago. We then moved over to annual emails for the most part. And we had an online QGIve page, and we watched that thermometer go up. And it is amazing how we went from our wedding list and our holiday card list, which was our first list, to, hey, the kids are in a new school. Let's send it out to the parents in their classroom. Or, hey, this is the second washer and dryer we bought from this guy at the appliance store. He gets a letter too. And it was fascinating who gave every year. It was amazing when we would be late sending the letter out and somebody would run into me in the grocery store that I hadn't seen in years. I would call them an acquaintance, but at some point they got a letter and she said, I haven't gotten your letter yet. So what we learned very quickly was once we got over I don't want to ask our friends and family for money, we realized that many of them felt relieved to have a way to help.
Yeah.
This isn't like someone had a baby and you drop off a lasagna or you offer to babysit. Our friends and families have seen us go through unknown issues, difficult diagnoses, difficult insurance fights and education, and they can't help.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can get $22 a year, they feel good about themselves. And if we tell them how that $22 was spent, then maybe the next year they give 44 or 220. My
Yeah.
husband and I have been so humbled by the amount of money that has come in. And it grew every year because our donors felt like investors. They felt like, we wrote this check and then, a year later we get this note saying what was done.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just research, it was family conferences and it was, whatever. So the first year was hard and every year after that has been easier.
Mm.
And it's not rocket science, it's just celebration of my child's birthday or Happy Valentine's Day for the people we love. There are people at the foundation that can help you with that.
Yeah.
So it's really made us feel again like we're doing something for Shannon. And it's something that I think families would be shocked how much their friends and family want to give.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think,
they've just been
yeah.
sitting back going, what can we do? What can we do? And
Yeah.
you're not going to say, come clean my house or come watch my kids, because probably they can't. But $22 or $220 or whatever they want to give. So that is my story, which was, no, I can't do this, to it's not that hard. And now it's our friends and families expect us to do this. And it's kind
Right.
of like annual celebration of Shannon.
Yeah. And I love that so much and the way it ties back to Shannon. And I think also, obviously you've been so committed on the research and the fundraising side for Phelan-McDermid syndrome, and all tied back to your daughter. And, after the devastating loss of your daughter a couple years ago, we named the Neuropsychiatric Grant in her honor, because to kind of continue that mission and all the work you've done. And so we are, continuing to celebrate her life with the Shannon O'Boyle Memorial Neuropsychiatric Illness Grant this year. And we will, by the time this airs, we will know who won that. And we'll probably put a little plug in. But right now, we're still kind of finishing up the review process. But again, we're just so grateful to you and the broader community who are so committed to and willing to fundraise or provide funds, even if it is just $22. Even for my first participation in Raising Hope this year, as soon as I suggested, hey, friends, don't just donate $22, I instantly tripled how many donations I had because it was just it was easier. You gave them a number, you figured it out for them. They didn't have to go through this thought process. Um, yeah.
I can't tell you how many times we've gotten $2,200 and it's not from the people that you would expect. It's pretty amazing. So it's very humbling, but also, Shannon did not suffer from debilitating seizures. So we never expected that she would predecease us. And I have to say, what I've learned in the last few years is that Shannon lives on in all the teachers and caregivers and therapists she had, but in research,
Yep.
not just this grant. She is still being written about in publications. Her
Yep.
data will be published for years and years to come. And her life was not in vain.
Yep.
Um, and I feel like that is one of the more comforting things, is that we participated in research. Now, I will say, when I was volunteering with the registry and my friends and family knew that I was kind of working the research corner of the foundation, not necessarily the support, they wanted to specify that their donation went towards research. And at the time, donations just went to the general thing.
Yep.
But I think you have some news for us.
Yes, I do. So we are going to, for the first time, actively ask for donations on behalf of research and research alone. The foundation really wants to continue and to expand our grants program to meet the needs of the families by improving their lives and the number of opportunities for researchers who right now, unfortunately, have fewer options in terms of grant funding. And so, this is a really exciting endeavor for Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. And I know it might not seem like that much to shift from we're going to collect donations for anything and everything, and then we get to pick where it goes. We're really sort of having a more active focus on funding the research. And I think this is also really important why we need to kind of resurvey our families too to figure out, well, what are we researching? And so, I want to also kind of emphasize in this that funding for research at the federal level is in a place it's never been before. And having been an academic researcher who was 100% dependent on grant funding, the idea that there's $20 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars less in research funding, people like me could be out of a job. Labs that are doing amazing work in Shank 3 and Phelan-McDermid syndrome have to pause. I know some of our senior researchers have mentioned letting some of their staff go. And so we as a foundation can provide support through additional research funds. This is one way, yes, to get researchers more funds, but ultimately, again, we're focused on what can our research do to help the families now and improve their lives.
And I can tell you, as someone that lives down the road from NIH and not too far from FDA, it's devastating to the people that have lived and been funded by the government to lose that. And the thing about research, even though I never liked it, is it's not just one thing that happens for a year.
Yeah.
It generally is something that starts in stages. And that's why you get another grant. And then maybe you might get investors or a drug company or something like that. These studies that have started can't just pause and pick up where they left off several years from now.
Yep.
So I am glad that I can tell our donors this year that yes, now they can specify if they want their donations to go towards research, because they all understand what our family went through when we lost Shannon and that there were a lot of unanswered questions. And a lot of them live in this area and know what funding cuts have been. What I hear you saying is that families like mine need to reach out to their friends and family. You can reach out to 22 of them, or you can reach out to 220. My list has grown up to 250. And just inform them of what's going on in your child's life, a couple sentences in the foundation's world with a link to the foundation page, and the opportunity to give $22 or whatever you want to present it to, specifically towards research.
Right.
And I think most of the US families have heard enough over the last 6 months to know that research is something that's being cut back. So Shannon's birthday was August 17th, so our letters will be going out sometime in August. Anybody who's on my Facebook page will see that I tend to put something. One year I posted something about Phelan-McDermid syndrome every day for 22 days.
Wow.
And I think people just donated, so I would just be quiet. But I will tell you, these friends and family that you don't want to ask actually feel very invested. They feel good about the fact that they're doing something if they realize it's doing something now. And a lot has happened since I was active in the foundation. I've heard things about gene therapies and all sorts of things that were never on our list.
Right.
So I think there's great stories to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I do want to mention, because I don't think our families understand, and again, something we're not necessarily always public about, but 90% of our funds come directly from donors. And that is obviously a huge percentage that we're relying on. And so by, having this new sort of earmark for research, we're really focusing in and being committed to that research because we're not necessarily getting funds from elsewhere to sort of build up our research programs. That is something that we do in addition. But again, 90% of those that are funds that support everything from research to the support programs that Carla runs, the consultations with medical providers, the biannual conference, all of that is coming from donations from, the listeners here, the people you're contacting from your wedding list or your Christmas card list, the random people on Facebook that you're friends with and just like want to feel good about themselves and want to commit to a good cause. And so we're really excited again to sort of be actively asking for donations on behalf of research. And we hope it's, something that turns out well and something we can start doing annually.
Well, Lauren, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. I have not, I was not at the conference and I haven't had an opportunity to see many of my PMS family. So it's nice to be able to get some word out. And I hope this resonates with everybody because this is for everybody.
Yep.
And I think the foundation is so good at being professional that we all for years and years and years thought of the foundation, and none of us thought about like what's holding that foundation up, and it's donations. And it doesn't have to come directly from families, but I think they will be surprised at how much their friends and family want to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know, we just scratched the surface on so much today, but I really am grateful for you to be here, Megan, and, share our history and commitment to research. And then obviously you've been obviously such a fearless champion for our community in so many different ways. And I'm excited that in a couple weeks, we'll find out who the 2025 Shannon O'Boyle Memorial Neuropsychiatric Illness Grant will be going to. I want to end with that we are holding our first fundraiser for research specifically. We will make sure this information will be in our show notes, so and you will see social media posts about it. You'll get an email about it, all of the above. We're really excited for this campaign and are so eager to expand our research grants program. And, it's with your donations and fundraising efforts that we are going to be able to provide the support needed to get new innovative ideas off the ground, promising research data forward, and directly enhance the care of your loved ones. So I hope this inspires you, and send it to all your family and friends and post it everywhere, so people can really understand why we're doing this fundraiser. And we hope it can have a big impact. Thanks again for being here, Megan.